Amadele. Let's bring him to the show. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. How are you?
What's up? What's up? What's up?
So let me see. I mean, I think we first had a conversation on the radio back in 2007 or 8, way back then.
Mhm.
That was our first encounter, and very different conversation. But 13 years later, we're having a conversation in a different space. Technology has actually evolved
Yep.
quite well. I'm going to
Mhm.
mention you had hair back then.
Yeah.
I
I
didn't have a
did.
beard back then, as Carla wanted to experience me yesterday. My voice has probably changed from then too.
It's
But
gotten a bit deeper. It's gotten a bit deeper.
this guy. But honestly, man, thank you for giving us the time. Yesterday, when we shared that you'll be joining the show, the response was quite amazing. And when I say amazing, people that were texting me and people that were on Twitter, and they're just like, "Oh, I can't wait to hear this conversation." So my thought was, "Oh man, we can't let people down because we know he's going to bring it. what, what are we going to do?"
Okay. No
But
pressure.
let's jump into the convo. Obviously, you're very outspoken. I refer to you, as I said earlier today, as a community educator, not an activist, and that's my own. I don't necessarily like the titles, but to me, you are an educator throughout your community, and not whether it's by you choosing to do that or not. That's how people view you. My question to start the conversation is pretty much Bermuda just celebrated National Heroes Day.
Mhm.
Um, you know what? Let's just take it from there. Like, what are your thoughts on the holiday and some of the honorees that have already been established, and then maybe some who you believe should be on the list?
Mm. Well, we just did have National Heroes Day. That is true. But we have to ask ourselves, how is it possible to have both Paulo Kamar Kafego on the one hand as a national hero and his sworn enemy, his adversary, um, the Honorable Sir Henry Tucker on the other, both being lauded, feted as Bermuda national heroes, where one is an unrepentant, unapologetic white supremacist visionary. That really is his claim to fame, who imagined a Bermuda where white supremacist hegemony would be extended in perpetuity, um, while being fronted by black faces. He handpicked John Swan, another Bermuda national hero, as well as E.T. Richards. These folk were handpicked. This was an instance of the white puppet master choosing black puppets. These men are not heroes if you recognize that justice and liberation are more than mere bywords, bereft of meaning for black people, right? And that's what Paulo Kamar Kafego was fighting for, not just in Bermuda, but around the globe. He was fighting against the forces of white supremacy. He was fighting against the forces of capitalism. He was fighting against the forces of colonialism, all of which put him at odds with the oligarchy here in Bermuda, right? But yet, because in large part we don't know the history, and we meaning people of our generation and those who are younger than us, we don't know the history of how Bermuda came to be. We have begun the process of lionizing wolves. Right?
Mm.
People who don't, and have people who have a proven track record of putting black interests last. Right? So that's the only way you can justify having Jack Tucker on the same bill as Paulo Kumar Kafego, and you do it with a straight face, finding no contradiction in the celebration of both of those gentlemen.
So, Ajala, Who are some people who you think deserve to be recognized as national heroes? And I mean, you've spoken of Jack Tucker as one who doesn't, but are there any other who you think should not have been?
Oh yeah, of course. E.T. Richards, I had said, and John Swan, again, because they were functionaries in the system of white supremacy as is practiced here in Bermuda. And again, if we talk about justice and liberation for Black people, right, then we cannot have folk who were part of the structure that made the lives of our parents and our grandparents a living hell, celebrated as national heroes. What we're doing is we're wiping the historical record clean of all of the myriad violations that were race-based, right? And that is something that, you know, if we respect our ancestors' struggles, then we cannot allow to continue. So those two gentlemen off the top should be, along with Jack Tucker, removed from the list. Again, if we respect our ancestors' struggles.
And who do you think deserves to be?
Let me see. Off the top, individuals and organizations, I would say. So you would have the Black Beret Cadre would be one. I think for his pioneering work in recording and chronicling our history, Cyril Atterbury Packwood would be another. For his strike against colonialism and white supremacy here in Bermuda, Erskine Durant Buck Burroughs should be another one. And folks saying, oh no, but he's a killer. But think about how many Black people, how many Black families, how many Black generations were brought to a too soon death as a result of the structural violence that was created by people like Jack Tucker. Yeah, more Black folk have been brought to a grave and interred in the ground before their time by within the house that Jack built, right, than have been killed by MOB 42 and Parkside combined. Right? So just because he did not pull a trigger does not mean that he is no less guilty of causing the death of Black people. Right? This is the nature of structural violence as opposed to individual interpersonal violence. Structural violence is far more insidious. Yeah.
Ajala, good morning. How are you?
Good morning.
What do you believe? Why do you believe Black history, specifically pre-slavery, is so important?
It provides context, right? If we start the story of African people, and I use African and Black interchangeably, like I would say 6 or half a dozen, it's one and the same thing, even if some Bermudians beg to differ. But it provides the context, you know, beginning a story at the second last, beginning the reading of a text at the second last page is essentially what we're doing. We're starting the story of Black folk at slavery, which in terms of our long history on this planet is that, a snap of the fingers, right? Although for us, you know, in our finite lives, it seems to be long. We're talking about from the time the Portuguese snatched the first African and brought him over to the West, about 1442 that occurred until the present. That's a pretty long time in our finite existence. But in terms of our long story as African people on the continent and throughout the diaspora, it's but a snap of the fingers, right? So we have to provide what were we doing before the European rapists and slavers docked their ships on the West African coast? What was happening in West and Central Africa? What were we doing? How did we commune with the divine? What was our understanding of God? Because we had all of that in place. What did democracy look like for African people? Right? What sorts of things, what technology had we generated? Right? all of these things. What civilizations had we grown on African soil by African hands and African minds, right? Yeah. So if we don't contextualize our story, we run the risk of looking at something and misunderstanding it. So we were never slaves. We were enslaved, and there's a difference. A slave is, I think Karl Marx described slaves as talking implements, right? Meaning that they were not actually within our understanding and definition of what it meant to be human, right? A slave is an object, not unlike livestock, not unlike a cow or a chicken, chicken, slave, etc. They occupy the same space, whereas human beings are subjects, they're not objects, right? And they act upon phenomena. Yeah? So it's important that we start to contextualize the conversation. You know, when we begin the story here in Bermuda of Black folk, you know, we have practiced, we have visited a violence on our ancestors because they had understandings of the world that they brought with them across the waters, right? They came from the Caribbean. Some came directly from the continent, right? And they came with an understanding of the world and themselves, right? So we have to ask questions like, what were they doing before they came here? Yeah, what were they doing? And why did the Europeans see fit to bring Africans by the millions to the so-called West? Yeah.
Junior, I'm sorry, I'm calling you by the name.
Junior works too. Junior works too.
So here in the UK, for example, there have been statues being torn down. I know globally as well, names of streets have been changed to honor Blacks. Do you consider this progress?
Cosmetic largely, because are they talking about how would I say this? Are they talking about are they going to go to the British Museum and return any of those objects that they have? No, they're not going to do that. Are they talking about the redistribution, the radical redistribution of wealth? Are they talking about that? No. So everything else is merely cosmetic, right? Because think about it, at the time of emancipation, 20 million British pounds were divvied up amongst the enslaver rapists, right? In the British colonies, 20 million pounds, right? Of which Bermudian enslaver rapists pocketed just over 50,000 pounds. Now, wealth, like feces, flows downhill. None of that money made it to the pockets of the people whose forced labor, whose hundreds of years of forced labor produced said wealth. Not a single pound, not a single shilling, right? And again, in terms of generational accumulation of wealth, running side by side with legislation that was racially discriminatory and which made it possible for white folk in Bermuda and their descendants to have disproportionate access to certain privileges and rights, which would again allow them to continue to accumulate wealth disproportionate to their intellectual abilities and their numerical to their population here on the island, because they're a numerical minority, right? So how did they manage to get all of this money? Is it because white folk just work harder than us? Is it because they are significantly more intelligent than we are? Now, we can come to those conclusions in the absence of an analysis of our history. Right? These things, and that again is the importance of having an understanding of the forces that brought us to where we are today. And that is why I think Sherilyn had asked the question about the importance of Black history. It's not just a sterile recitation of facts. I don't want to hear that. It's not a Black History Minute. It's providing me an analytical lens through which to look at what I'm facing today. I look at the past in order to better understand the present. and plot a course into the future. So history is a tool, right? It's both a map and a mirror. I've said quite a few times to folks. It's very important to study history, not just to show off during Jeopardy when they have the rare Black history column. No, I don't want to do that. That don't make no sense. It's a tool, you know, it's a tool.
So here lately, we've been seeing some major corporations, issuing apologies, these feel-good statements. Should we be concerned?
Should we be concerned? Like, how do you mean?
Well, meaning, I guess it plays into the other question. Do you think it's cosmetic? Do you think it's genuine? Are we in for some awakening award as Black people? I don't know. Acknowledgement?
No. In a word, no. It's good business. It's smart PR, right? You wanna be in on this wave, this trending. Black rage is trending. Hashtag. Right. So you don't want to, any PR person worth his or her salt would say, look, you want to get in on the front end of this. Say something like Black Lives Matter, hashtag justice for George Floyd. Just put that up. Right. Because you don't want the natives to pull their money from your company. Because in the end, corporations are there to generate profits. Right. So if you are surveying the social media scene and you see what is trending, you jump on that trend. So some would say, "Oh, that's quite cynical," but no, that's good business. That's good business, you know. And corporations have had a long history of co-opting Black protests. So, for example, during the 70s, there was an environmental group whose name evades me, but anyway, they said, Black is beautiful, but so is green, right? To pitch their particular corporation, and also to align themselves with something that felt a bit avant-garde and edgy, right? Cosmetic, absolutely cosmetic.
Go ahead, Carla.
Sorry.
Ajala, throughout all of this, we've seen the All Lives Matters hashtag, and then you have other people also coming in with, well, what about Black and Black crime? What do you have to say to those people?
All lives matter?
Black on Black crime in particular.
And Black crime? Yeah, I think your boy Steve Corbishley fixed his lips to say that as well. Again, it's not a surprise. The idea of centering the value of Black life in a world that is fundamentally anti-Black, in a world that's fundamentally white supremacist, and unapologetically so, will generate kickback. And so it's almost reflexive, you know, because as slaves, as non-humans, we don't have a right to center the particularities of our story in the public sphere, right? So it must be co-opted. You know, what about these other lives? As if that's what Black Lives Matter is even saying. It's not. It's not. And the argument of, well, what about Black on Black crime, can be dismissed as absurd on its face. Because again, with an analysis of history, you'll see that and when forces conspire against a group of people over hundreds of years, when in every area of human activity, Black people are dehumanized, you know, maligned, terrorized, attacked, maimed, and killed, right? And where we are denied justice, we're denied access to the so-called equal playing field, then violence within our communities, which is produced by the dysfunctional reactions to that economic, political, cultural, religious violence converging on our individual selves. Well, violence between one another Violence between people who have been taught to hate and debate them and debase themselves is an inevitability. So what you're seeing is not so-called black on black violence, but more so the result of hundreds upon hundreds of years of the denial of black humanity in all of its forms, and hundreds of years of the conditioning of an entire people to see themselves as less than human. So what you see on the street, again, is the result of hundreds of years of white supremacist violence being visited upon a people. It's asymmetrical warfare. Right? They have created in an entire society that is predicated on our non-humanity. Right? The education system gives us no look in to analyze what is happening to us, what has been done to us. So we can't even enter into the discussion. Think about it by way of analogy. Any doctor worth his or her salt will look into a patient's medical history, correct? In order to understand the nature of the current malady that is menacing their patient. We don't do that. The doctor would not blame the patient for, well, wow, you're morbidly obese, or you have, ailment X, without analyzing what brought that patient to be in that condition right now. Right? A good doctor would say, well, this has been happening. Some good doctors would even go into the psychological aspects of why one would grow to be morbidly obese. Is there a history of sexual abuse in your family? And if so, let's unpack that, because that has an effect, right? Is there all of these things a good doctor would bring to the analysis of the current ailment, right? But we here in Bermuda would say, well, these youth are just going crazy all by themselves. Ridiculous, errant nonsense, And so we have catchphrases like senseless violence. No, the violence makes a lot of sense if you analyze the historical antecedents, which we do not do. So then we can fling these terms about, empty terms, senseless violence. There is no such thing as senseless violence. Because consider, again, were we always this way? Were Black men always at each other's throats? If not, what changed that? If not, who changed that? Yeah. So again, to bring it back to the beginning of the conversation, the analysis of history is so critical. Because we were not always at each other's throats. We did not always privilege light skin over dark skin. Just by way of, to give another example, these things, again, flowed down upon us.
Yeah.
So, Ajala, tomorrow is Juneteenth, and a number of national companies have decided to make it an official holiday, I believe for the first time. What are your thoughts on that?
Again, it's not a surprise. I do it too. Companies are fundamentally amoral entities, right? They have no heart. But again, if you see what is trending, right, and you want to engage in the politics of Black anger management, then you would want to do something like this. So the idea of the support for Juneteenth as a national holiday makes all the sense in the world. Consider and keep this in mind. Black people, no matter where they are in the world, have always been the vanguard fighting for a fundamental restructuring of society. Every single time. If you think about the United States, although Africans in the US are but 13% of the population, they have always been the spear tip, right, that is piercing the side of oppression in the United States. And all groups in the United States have benefited significantly from the struggles that Black people have waged against oppression in the United States, right? So knowing this, we have to do an end run, if you will, and co-opt that roiling Black anger before it bubbles up out of control. You don't want that, because when we are united in our rage and animated by our thirst for justice, things change in pretty radical ways. I'm thinking in particular of what happened between 1791 and 1804 in a place that was then called Saint-Domingue that we now know as Haiti. Right? We got stuff done. Our rage was out of control, and we fundamentally transformed that society from one that was based on the enslavement of African people to one that was declared a free republic, a free and independent republic, the first one in the so-called West under the leadership of Jean-Jacques Dessalines. So you need to get your colors in check is the point. You can't have, and you also need to defang, bringing it back to Bermuda, our celebration of folk who are bad Negroes, right? So, okay, we'll give you Paulu, but we'll also give you John Swan, because heroes are models, right? We want our children to be heroic, right? Do you really want your child to be like Erskine Durant Buck Burroughs? Think of another person who was not afraid of violence, right? Think of another person who was not afraid to shed the blood of their oppressor. There's, I think, was it Alexander Hamilton? I always get this. He said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Isn't he celebrated in the United States as a father of the nation? But he was talking that bad talk, you know. He was willing to fight, to shed the blood of the folks he saw as the oppressors, right? Interesting that. So maybe in another few years, we will come to the point where we will know enough about our story to understand that what Buck Burroughs was executed for doing, slaying Richard Sharples and his ADC, Hugh Sayers, was actually an act of self-defense. That's a different conversation.
Indeed.
Because if he was acting in self-defense, who was the aggressor?
Right.
We're talking about structures of white supremacist violence that have been in place hundreds of years. The first rule is self-defense. I have a right to protect my life. So how was Buck wrong for killing the governor? A different conversation based on a different understanding of history. A different and dangerous and an unsettling conversation, I know, especially for Negroes who want to find a place at Master's table. I get it.
Brother Junior, got to wrap it up. But real quickly, this program is shared by people after it's live. And let's say it falls into the hands of some of the young people that are engaged in some of the activities that you've seen in recent times that people believe are destructive. What message do you have in 60 seconds or less to the young people in Bermuda?
Well, it would be one that I've shared. I remember when I was up at Westgate and, you know, telling brothers about, you know, history in general, but Paulu in particular. And it was quiet. You could have heard an ant fart. And what was particularly striking was the brother just jumped up angry. He was maybe all of 22. And he said, "If I knew this, I wouldn't be here. If I knew this before, I wouldn't be here." Because rage is good. Rage is good. But we have to learn how to direct that anger. Anger is necessary. Things are still wrong today, but we have to learn to guide that rage accordingly. And that is the importance of the study of history. So I'd say to us, because it's we who must save them. They can't save themselves. We have to save them. That means that we have to become students of our story in order to share it with them and sayers of truth publicly in order to be recognized as real by the young brothers on the street. Because, you know, they don't do folly and nonsense and empty words. They don't do that. They want to know that you're real, and they feel that. They can feel what's real. That's why they loved Paulu back in the day and followed his leadership, because he was not one to suffer with fools gladly. Courage. It takes courage to save our baby.
For sure. Brother Ajala Amadele, thank you. Honestly, what I will say is it's not going to be another 12, 13 years before we do this again. I appreciate Look, I don't have much left myself.
Ooh, I didn't want to say nothing.
Yeah. Hanging on to I've been there, but thank you for this conversation. Please keep spreading the word, and know that the door is open whenever you feel like you want to share something. And
Okay.
we will be reaching out to you to come back, because we need more of what you do share. So thank you. We appreciate you. We love you. And honestly,
I
keep
see you,
going.
fellas.
Keep going, brother. Thanks again.
All right, King.
Alrighty. Wow. Someone sent me a